Hello. Today we're going to talk about designing kick butt presentations. So this is a presentation about presentations. And there are two things that we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about concept, how do you create a concept and what you want to do, and then actually put it into design. Concept includes things like focus, simplicity, signal to noise ratio, and stickiness. And in the design section, we'll talk about finding images, using them, working with text, as well as actually giving that presentation. So let's start off with concept. You probably have a lot of different ideas on what you want to do. And the best presentations often are the most simple presentations. I'm going to reference this book a little bit. It's by Gar Reynolds. It's called Presentation Zen, and it's an excellent tool and resource if you want to learn about this further. Gar's a very experienced presenter, and he really knows what he's talking about and puts it in a way that's very easy to understand. So one of the things that he talks about is focus. You've got all these ideas that you want to convey to your presenters, and you can't possibly get to all of them in a short span of time. So you need to think about it like an elevator pitch. You might have heard about an elevator pitch from career services, or if you went to some career coaching. It's the idea that if you had only reduced down your message to the amount of time it took to ride an elevator, what would that be? So the best way to do this is to really map it out, really think about what it is that you want to do. Here's a map that I use and I think about when I'm designing a presentation. I think of my core concept. What is my main idea? From that, what are the ideas and images that I associate with that? That will help out when we get to the slide design. And finally, what are the colors and maybe emotions that this evokes? That will also help us when we figure out exactly how we want something to look, or maybe what stories we're going to tell, or how we're going to present that to our audience. The next step is think about storyboarding, right? Lay out your slides in such a way that you can actually visually see them. Both PowerPoint and Keynote allow this ability. There is a storyboard view that you can use, and it's a great way to kind of look at your presentation all at once. So let's move on to simplicity. The best presentations are the simplest presentations. They don't try to jam too much information into a single session, but figure out what it is that they want to convey and do it in a very simple way. So let's look at this concept called as a signal to noise ratio. And I'm going to show you a few slides that will highlight this idea. If you've got a lot of noise going on in the background, your signal, which is that message that you want to give to your audience, tends to get lost. So let's look at this first slide. There's a lot of noise going on in this slide, right? A lot of pictures, things where the text really isn't the center of what we want to talk about. If we modify this a little bit, we can reduce some of that noise. So this is a much better presentation than that, because it makes it much more simple and conveys your message in a way that you can read it and take it in very easily. If we were to take that a step further, you can look at this. Now that's very simple, very clean, very easy to understand. And we can even use text to enhance this further. So in the next slide, we've used this concept of stretch, right, with the rubber bands, and you put it in red and kind of stretched out that text a little bit. And so that kind of helps us maintain a level of simplicity. One other thing you'll notice is that the slide actually uses the rule of thirds, which is where you should try to place your elements on your slides to give them a more harmonious look. So if you want to learn a little bit more about rule of thirds, take a look on the internet and do a search for that, and it will tell you a little bit how you should design your slides. I want to give you another example of something with a high signal or high noise ratio here, and that's this. This slide has a lot going on. It uses a lot of bells and whistles that are included with PowerPoint that really have kind of a bad effect to the message that we're trying to give. A much simpler way to present this actually doesn't use a template at all. It looks simply like this. And you can see it's much clearer what we're looking at. The use of red to denote 2010 focuses the audience's attention on what we really want them to look at, which is this increase that we've had. And it's very clean and simple. So when you're designing your slides, or you're even thinking about what is this message that I want to give, think about how you can reduce the noise. What do you really need versus what is just background or stuff that you want to include but you don't need to include? The next part about thinking about your concept is make it sticky. Now, Chip and Dan Heath had this book called Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. And there were 6 concepts that they put in here that I think you'll find helpful in developing a concept for your presentation. The first one is the idea of simplicity. We've already talked about this a little bit. Make it simple. But also include things that are unexpected. These are things that the audience will remember after the fact. If you can remember the last time you heard a presentation or something unexpected happened to you, it probably sticks out in your memory. The other concept is concreteness. Make it real world and practical, something that your audience can immediately grasp and see how it relates to them. Credibility is another way to make things stick. Use statistics. Use sources that actually back up what you're saying and give you some credibility when you're talking to audiences so that they believe what you're saying. The next concept is emotion. So use emotions in your talk. Make people not just take in dull information, but have a reaction to it. And that leads actually to our final concept here, which is stories. Stories are great for presentations. Stories allow you to connect with someone, give you a memorable experience. Try to incorporate at least one story in any presentation you do. So again, a lot of these concepts coming from Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, but also these books by Garr Reynolds will really help you out. So I encourage you to take a look at them. The next part we want to go to, now that we've worked through our concept, is to move on to design. And there's a few things I'm going to talk about here in the design category. And that's finding and using images, how to work with text, and then ultimately how do you give that presentation. So let's jump into design. We're going to take a little commercial break now, and we're going to watch a video that comes from Don McMillan. He is a comedian, and he has a website called technicallyfunny.com. So if you really enjoy this video, find Don on YouTube or go to technicallyfunny.com, and you can actually purchase some of these videos or view them.
Thank you. Thanks. There's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number 1, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number 2, most common. Many people do not run spell cheek. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data into their presentations. They just shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Yeah. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science I've invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you. So be careful the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, it happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized and structured. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default. Oh. A lot of Times New Roman people, welcome. We have some more. If you use freehand script, you're a horrible speller, so you try to hide it with a hard-to-read font. Very smart. If you use Gothic, it means you're very pale and you wear black. And if you choose Wingding, it means you're a nerd and you have no life. In fact, if you know what those symbols mean, you will never have a date, trust me. Don't bother.
All right, a fun little video there that is funny, but also I think really informative. So that's gonna lead us off into talking about design. And we're gonna start off with finding images. For me, when I design presentations, I often start with the image. What is it that distills down what I want to convey? And most of us, when we're looking for images, are immediately going to go here, right? We're going to go to Google. Now, there's some problems with doing Google image searches, and that's the fact that using some of these images that are commercial or not intended for reuse can actually be illegal. And there are ways to mitigate this, because you also want to find really high-quality images that you can use in your presentations as well. So if we do a simple Google search right now for the word tree and look at all the different trees that come up, there's a few ways that we can refine this search so that we can find images that we can both reuse and are of high quality. So if we click on Search Tools, you're going to be presented with a bar that looks like this. And you'll notice that the first thing that comes up is size. You are almost always going to want to find the largest size image you can. That means it won't look pixelated or blurry or strange when you place it into your PowerPoint. So always pick a large size image. You'll also notice that the next item says usage rights. Under usage rights, you can actually pick things that allow for non-commercial reuse of images. And so this will weed out some of the things that are maybe copyrighted that you really shouldn't be using. So when you're doing your search, don't just take whatever comes up. Actually refine this and use some of these other features that Google provides you. When you're looking for images, the best way to think about it is the standard resolution of a screen that you'd be presenting on is 1024 by 768. That's 1024 pixels wide by 768 pixels high. And so if you're looking for an image, try to find one that at least reaches those dimensions. Now, if you're doing something in print, you're going to need something of much higher quality. You'll see over there on the right it says print at 300 dpi. DPI stands for dots per inch. You'll notice on a screen it says 76 dpi, only 76 dots per inch. That means that you don't need quite as high of a quality or big of a file in order to view it on a screen and have it look good as if you were going to put it into print. Just something to think about. So if you want to find images but you don't want to spend a lot of money, another way you can go is to look for Creative Commons. Creative Commons images are a certain licensing scheme that allows you to share your work widely with an audience. And so if you were to go to search.creativecommons.org, you can actually find folks that have purposefully put up images that they want other people to share. And so that's another great tool beyond just Google that you can actually find much better quality images. Another option is to go to Wikimedia Commons. And that's a place where it also hosts a number of different images that you can use for free that are allowed to be reused. You'll notice it sounds very similar to Wikipedia. It's by those same folks, and so it has that same concept of a creative place where everyone can enjoy and use and remix different people's works. Another place I like to go to for inspiration is SlideShare. And SlideShare is kind of like the YouTube of presentations. You're not going to be able to find many images here, but it will at least give you some ideas as to concepts of how you could use them. So take a look at some of the top SlideShares, and you'll see some images that people use and how they use them. And that transitions us into the next section, which is using images. Okay, so we found them, but how do we use them? I want you to understand a basic concept about images. There's really two types. There's vector-based images and raster-based images. Vector-based images you might think of as clip art. And what that means is the computer actually redraws the lines of the individual piece of clip art every time you resize it. So no matter how big you make it, it is always going to look crisp and clean. Raster-based images are kind of like photographs. They're typically what you would think of as an image that's made up of a lot of different pixels. And so the bigger that you make that image, the more blurry it's going to become. So when you're thinking about using images, you might want to think about using some vector-based or raster-based images based on what you wish to do. When you're placing those images in your slide, think about how you're going to place them and what you're going to do with them. Consider stretching your images. This might be a way you'd insert a picture into a slide with a text next to it. It's fine, but it's not terribly dynamic. But if you stretch out your images and have it fill the whole screen, suddenly it has a much better impact on the audience. And you can put your text right there in the image. Be careful too when you do this that you don't contort your images. Meaning we don't want people that are really tall and skinny or really short and wide. Make sure that you're keeping things in perspective. Some programs will do this for you automatically, but some still allow you to change things and distort the perspective. So when you're dragging and kind of resizing an image, consider pressing Shift. This is often the function that allows you to keep something in perspective when you change its size. Also be careful not to use images with watermarks. This image comes from iStockPhoto, which is a stock photo service. Therefore, if you wanted to use the actual image, you have to pay for it. And so what they do is they put previews of these images online and include a watermark over it. That's that kind of translucent iStockPhoto logo that you see. If you're seeing that, that means you really can't use this in your presentation. You also probably shouldn't because you don't want this logo hanging out on your slide when you're talking. It's very distracting. So avoid images with watermarks. Another idea in using images is use white space to your advantage. You'll notice here that I found an image of a camera on a white background, and it makes a great way of presenting text that isn't distracted from an image. So either you can fill the screen with an image, or find a way that you can use white space to your advantage. Those are just a few tips on using images, but I want to move on now to text. And when you're working with text, I think there's a few things that you need to know. There's really basically three types of fonts. And those three fonts are known as serif fonts, sans serif fonts, and what might be considered an artistic or kind of wild font, right? So let's start with serif. Serif are those little dingly doodads that hang out on the ends of fonts. And any serifed font is one that has these attached to it. Serif fonts are great for when you're presenting large blocks of text. They're easier to read, more forgiving on the eye. There are differing opinions about this, but that is generally the case. That's why you'll find that most books and newspapers are printed in serif fonts for their text. Sans serif does not have those dingly doodads on the ends of the fonts. They're missing. That's why we put the word sans in front of it, meaning without. So sans serif is without serifs. And sans serif fonts are great for headlines. They're very clear, they're very bold. If you're just doing a few words or pieces on text, titles, it's great for that. So that's where you might want to use sans serif fonts. Artistic fonts are those funky, crazy ones that have ice on them or look like they're made out of wood or different kinds of strange, all sorts of different looks. And artistic fonts are great for conveying a feeling. They aren't something you'd want to put large blocks of text in because they'd be extremely hard to read, but they're great in small bits just to kind of add a different feeling or thought to your slides. So consider using artistic fonts. There's one caveat to this, and you'll know that fonts, if they're not on your computer and you switch computers, suddenly won't render properly. So you might use this, it'll look great on your home computer, but then you move it to a laptop or a presentation computer and suddenly that font is missing and the computer replaces it with something else and it looks awful. Be careful when you're using artistic fonts to make sure that you bring those fonts with you because that will often be a case where your slides will look a little bit different than how you designed them. A trick I use to get around this is to actually create an image of the slide and paste it in. So either I will do a screenshot and then paste that in as the slide, or some presentation software like Keynote allows you to export slides as images. You can export them as images and then place that image back on your slide. Now that you've got it all based in a photograph, you don't need to worry about having that font or not. It's automatically baked in there. The only problem, of course, is you can't edit it after you do it. You'd have to completely remake it to fix it in the end. So that's a little bit about fonts. Now, when you're working with fonts, don't be afraid to break up your text. You can move things around. You can break it into different places, different ways of looking at it. If we look at this, it's a standard headline, right? So we've just got text, I typed it straight across, and there it is. Looks good. But there are ways that you can move that around. And so what I did here was I took the individual words of the headline and moved them in a different pattern. And it's a little bit more dynamic. So don't be afraid to move your text or break it up and reorganize it in a new way. You can also add text inside your images. Remember when we took our image and made it fill the screen? Here we've got that same image again and we added the text inside the image itself. A great way of presenting your concepts. If you've got a picture that maybe is a little bit noisy, has a lot of going on, so you don't know where to put your text that you could read it, you can also think about putting a translucent box behind it. This will make your text stand out and not compete with the background. So that's a little bit about images, but I want to move on to kind of one of our last sections here, which is talking about actually giving that presentation. The biggest pitfall that people run into when they're doing this is they attempt to create what's called a slide-ment, right? It's a combination of slides and document. They try to put a lot of bullet points in, try to cram all their information so that everyone can read it. You really need to think about these as two different things. Your slides are the visual way that you're presenting your information, but if you have a lot of text or other resources that you want your audience to have for later, consider breaking that out into a handout, or maybe a web page, or something where you can present that information to them that they can access later. Don't try to treat your slides as the document or worksheet or handout that you want to give later. And that's in part why you should use bullet points sparingly. It's not that you shouldn't use bullet points at all, but you should use them when they make sense. And think about that. Don't just open up a slide and start typing away, because then that's what's going to make your presentation really busy and hard to follow. The last thing I want to leave you with when you're thinking about giving your presentation is how can you create a story? If you remember back to when we talked about Chip and Dan Heath's book, Made to Stick, one of the ways to make a presentation memorable is to include stories. Your presentation as a whole, though, is also a story. So are you building an arc that starts from the beginning to the end that builds on your story? Do your slides and your design build that story consistently from beginning to end? Think about it as a story, not just conveying information. So we really went over two different areas about presentations today. We started off with concept and then went into design. When we talked about concept, we thought about how can I focus in on what is the main message I want to give. We talked about being simple in that concept, distilling it down to just a few thoughts or words, one simple idea. We talked about the concept of signal to noise ratio and how we want our signal, that is the message that we want to convey, to be much louder and brighter so that it cancels out any noise that may be in the background. Finally, we talked about concepts of stickiness and what it is that makes presentations memorable. In the design category, we talked about finding images, how to use them, how to place them into a slide, as well as what kinds of texts and fonts to use. We wrapped up everything with presentations, where I gave you just a few tips on how to actually deliver that. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you got something out of our presentation on presentations today. And if you want to interact with me further, please feel free to do so. I do on my website maintain a number of different blog entries related to presentation tips. So if you look for that category on my blog, you can find out some more. Thanks again.